Hi everyone and welcome to another video. Today we are doing an MLA member interview. Joined with me today is Zach. You've been in the MLA for quite a while now, so walk us through, Zach, and tell us a little bit about yourself, what rank you started, and
Yeah.
kind of what we're going to be talking here about today.
So I'm 27 years old. I've been playing the game since season three. So when I was about 14, I started playing. Um, I have a lot of competitive hobbies, and they've kind of dipped in and out. And I'll talk about that, I guess, a little bit with my history in League. But I play Magic the Gathering. I played StarCraft, actually all the way back since I was 8 years old.
Oh wow.
And like I remember growing up watching VODs of StarCraft, like professional StarCraft in Korean. So like esports is like a huge part of who I am. I love, like, if you see me on the Discord, you'll see my Team Liquid logo. If you see my thing in game, Team Liquid, I absolutely love Team Liquid because of the history and how much they've done for the game. Um, but yeah, uh, kind of just a jockey nerd is kind of how I like to describe it.
Awesome. Well, that's actually very interesting because I think it's important to understand one's gaming background, right? Because that
Yeah.
shapes the sort of journey you're going to have. So, you joined the MLA. What was the date? Do you remember roughly when it was?
It was middle of January,
This year, middle of Jan this year,
this
right?
year.
Yeah. And you
Hmm.
came
Yep.
in the end of last season. I think you finished around low plat,
Yeah.
and you basically finished your placements. You were sitting around top of gold one, right? About gold one,
Yeah.
P4, somewhere in
Yeah.
there.
Something like that. I think like after you play your first game, I got gold three, but through my placements, I think I finished gold two or gold one.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay, and so you were roughly a P4 player, and
Oh yeah.
your champ pool was quite unique. You played Camille mid.
Hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it just Camille mid, or were you a
Correct.
one trick, or what was the pool exactly?
So I come from top lane this
Hmm.
year, and
Wait, so this is your first. This was
I
your first year in mid.
yeah.
Okay.
First year, like actually trying in mid lane. Like
Okay.
if you look back at my OPGG, there's like I have like favorite champions that I've played throughout the seasons, and like you'll look at one season, it'll be like Lee Sin, Kassadin, Ezreal, and some random all the roles that
Hmm.
are like up at like 50 games,
Right.
um, for whatever reason. But yeah, this is my first year actually playing mid lane
Okay.
seriously.
So what we're going to do, we're going to try and paint the picture here. And the reason I wanted to
Yeah.
get you on to do this MLA member interview, because I think you've kind of been through the works. You've had a very, in my opinion, there's a lot we've covered in your journey. I think you also
Mhm.
have a very good relationship with the game. And I think it'd be great to kind of share what your experiences were like and give some advice from your perspective to other people out there in the community with their climb and kind of what are some of the things you went through, what gave you success, what didn't give you success to kind of help other people. And I think that, you know, as a coach, I think I could give a lot of advice, but ultimately, there's an element of like detachment from one's journey. Like I haven't played through platinum and diamond in many, many, many years, and for someone
Sure.
like you who's been through that journey, you just have that element of just you've been there, you're fresh, you know what it's like. So I think you can really give a lot of insight here. So what we're going to talk about is, you in platinum four, you in low platinum,
Yeah.
what was maybe some of the challenges you faced? What were some of the things that really kept you? I mean, and obviously a lot of this is kind of in hindsight. Like
Sure.
you probably didn't have a clear idea of why you were a platinum player. Like now, obviously thinking about it in hindsight, why were you a platinum player, and what were some of the things that kept you there? You think?
Oh man, it's so easy to point to why I was a platinum player. Um, so in with my history and just gaming in general, every game that I've ever played, I've hit top 20%. And I hit there by just I just play the game. I've been playing mouse and keyboard my whole life, and really I just got there off like intuition just by myself. I wasn't really thinking about the game. Like I remember in our Camille, the first one that we had, I was trying to push the wave as Camille. Like that doesn't make any sense. You want to pull the wave and like create a long lane, but I'm like, oh no, like for whatever reason, I thought mid lane was just push the wave, impact the map. Didn't make any sense. And even in other roles, top lane, I played like 550 games of Camille over 2 years. I was basically a one trick for the previous 2 seasons, and like I had just such this narrow view of the game where like I had a spreadsheet of like every matchup, and this is just how it went. There's no breaking rules. I was never like, this is just how you play the game, and you know, just trying to.
So you would say that you had a very rigid outlook on the game, and you're saying one of your weaknesses was wave management. You didn't really understand why you needed to do what with the wave, and that was and you, I guess, got to Platinum 4 not because of your wave management and fundamentals, more so from understanding of your limits, probably your skirmishing mechanics max or something like that.
It was mostly just game knowledge. So, like, I can play every champion in the game at a Platinum 4 level. Like I've played every role, like just doing whatever. And
you just got so many games under your belt.
Yeah. Like, for instance, like the first season that I played was like growing up. I was like 14 at the time. My parents had heavily restricted my gaming before then. So the first year I played League was the first year they unrestricted it, and I actually played, if you can believe it or not, 1,800 games of ranked that season in 1 year, which is insane. I can't even believe. I don't even know how I played that many games. But I like, just because I had just vast knowledge of like knowing what all the cooldowns were, and like generally kind of knowing what like other people kind of want in the game. Like I had a good feel for how the game evolves. So yeah.
Okay.
And the like one thing that like kept me, that there's one season where I almost got diamond. And I actually was in diamond for a little bit, but that was a year that I played collegiate. And I played jungle that year. So I only made the team because I was the shot caller. I knew what everyone else wanted, kind of, and was able to do that. Because also I watched so much pro. Now I don't think it's that relatable in hindsight. Like looking back at it now, it's a completely different game.
Right.
But
so in hindsight, given your experiences with the game, given that you've kind of really wanted to take mid seriously, you probably would have done it through a complicated champion like Sylas. You probably would have tried to do it with something with clearer reference points and something that's a little bit more simple. Okay.
Yeah. And we talked. We went back and forth for a bit, and I asked for your recommendation of like, I really just want a champion. Like, who's a champion that's good to learn mid on? Who's a good champion that has good fundamentals? You gave me a list. One of those champions was Ahri. I have a cat who is named Ahri because she looks exactly like the midnight skin before the rework. And so I decided, I like Ahri. So we'll play Ahri.
Okay, and so this was your still low plat at the stage, P4 essentially. You've now got Ahri. You're still situationally playing Camille mid.
Camille,
so you've got this true champion. Okay, so what were some of the things that we covered when you were low plat, getting those Ahri games in? What are some of the things that really kept you in low plat, and what were the things that were holding you there? And in general, what did we work on?
There's a lot of mid lane fundamentals, like learning that like leaning was a thing. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, because most of the time I'd played jungle or a side lane, so I'm just like, you place a ward and you just sit in your lane, it's fine. So I needed to learn where to place my ward in the mid lane, and that I actually need to play to the side. And like from playing top lane for 2 years, I actually had a decent wave management, but all the other like fundamentals of mid lane,
warding,
resets
leaning
were terrible. Warding and leaning was terrible.
Right. And so your threat assessment was obviously probably a little bit off as well.
Oh yeah, and honestly, the thing that made me actually start to, I immediately once we had one review on this, and I picked up Ahri, I implemented one thing to my gameplay, and I instantly hit Platinum 2. And that one thing was just having a plan. It didn't matter if the plan was good. it didn't matter if the plan was terrible. It just, if I came in with an idea, I could accurately assess like how that idea um, played out in the lane. Because if you come in with no into a lane with no plan, then you're just kind of throwing things at a wall and you have no intention, right?
Or someone else is going to dictate that plan for you, and then you're not really going to get that learning.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it ties into one of my
Exactly.
favorite quotes, right? Where it's like a poor plan executed well is better than a great plan executed poorly. And even if it's wrong, sometimes it just
Mhm.
works anyway. It's like if you really understand what the benefits of that plan are or what the downsides are. And that's actually,
Yeah.
so I actually want to expand on this. I think this is a really important point, is that people get really obsessed about having the perfect lane plan. No, this is how you play the matchup. That's how you play the matchup.
No.
At the end of the day, yeah, sure. On paper, objectively, there is like a correct way, right? The most optimal way to play a given matchup, given mid jungle 2v2. But that everyone is playing so poorly, all these ELA brackets, all the way up until Grandmaster anyway, that it doesn't even matter. It really doesn't matter. Pick one thing that somewhat works and commit to it.
Yeah, like I played a game recently that was Ari versus Syndra. Syndra should dumpster Camille or Ari, right? But I took C-Pot. I played the lane super fast. I used my W movement speed to dodge all of her skill shots, and I dumpstered her in late. Like that's not supposed to happen, but it shows that different players have different skills at different brackets, and if you know something that your opponent doesn't know, even if it's not correct, sometimes you can abuse that.
100%. Okay, so now we've got into P2 at this stage, simply working on having a plan and brushing up on some of your fundamentals. So your warding and leaning has gotten a little bit better. Your resets have gotten a little bit better. You started to work on your threat assessment. We're starting to come into lanes with a bit more intention with what you want to do with waves, or like what you're trying to achieve big picture. Like, for example, I want to play fast with C-Pot, or I want to play slow with this, and I want to have these sorts of wave sets. So we've got all that kind of structure there. That gets you to P2. Okay, so walk us through now. P2 to D4, that whole and diamond, low diamond, what was going on there?
So, I have long days at work, and things are really tough sometimes. And I had a really hard time playing with intensity. Like I'd come home and I'd be exhausted, but I was like, I have to get my at least a 2 block in today because I tried to play every day. But what I found out is having a routine and having consistency with what you want to do, and just outside of the game, things matter so much. So what I do now, and through my journey up until that point, I had several problems with getting upset at times with the fact that I wasn't doing well, even though I know all these things. Like I want to be able to execute on all this stuff that I know, but I can't. So what I do is, depending on the day and how late it is, when I come home from work, I absolutely love coffee. So I just grab a cup of coffee, I sit down, and make sure that I'm fully focused. So I review all my games before I get my block in, and that just builds up my intensity so that I'm like, oh, okay, I'm thinking about the game now. And then once I start thinking about the game, I can actually fully execute on all these things that I've actually learned.
Okay, so this is very, very interesting. I really want to go. There's so many things here I want to touch on. So, gameplay, Champles, we add in Ari, we work on some of those things we mentioned. That gets us to P2. What pushed you from P2 to low diamond wasn't necessarily learning new things. It was executing on the things that you already know, building muscle memory. But in order to actually build that muscle memory and reduce self-sabotage, you found that having some sort of a process and working on your out of game was the thing that you needed. And for you, that was, you actually reviewed before blocks, which I love. That's actually something that I'm a big advocate of. And for the people who are listening who don't really know what that is, typically when you've heard of reviewing, you probably hear of play, review, play, review, play, review. Another method is that of reviewing your past day's games, even if it's not fully in depth, just roughly, to kind of put you, before you play your next block, because that way you're primed mentally to be like, okay, that's kind of what was going on. I see what sort of mistakes I was making. That it kind of all clicks together, right? And you found that in combination with really having some sort of a process that worked for you. And you said you played in Was it blocks of 2 or blocks of 3?
So it depends.
Right.
It was blocks of 2 to 4, depending on my
Yeah.
energy level.
So that's exactly the same as me. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a rule that so I go into work pretty late. I have a flexible schedule, so I can show up at like 10 or 11. So my rule was I never played a game past midnight. And I really tried to get in whatever games I could. I had to start before midnight because I know that once I hit a certain point in the night, I'm not gonna be able to actually focus on these games, and you lose almost every single one because you're not playing with intensity. So depending on like if I got home like late, if it was a late day, then maybe I'd only play a 2 block. But if I got home at 6 p.m. for whatever reason, then yeah, that's going to be a 4 block night. Because as long as by the fourth game no like major things have happened in the games to frustrate me. Because also if like some teammate was being really toxic for whatever reason, like I mute chat, I have permanently the enemy chat muted, but I keep my team chat on because it's sometimes good for communication. Um, but if a game frustrated me, like if I got dumpstered in lane, or if like for whatever reason I felt like a previous game was going to affect my next game, I just like we'll review it tomorrow and figure out why this all happened, and then I'll have some closure on it for me to play my next block. But right now I can't deal with this. It's going to frustrate me and affect my gameplay.
Right. So what's interesting is that you don't do you review at all between your games, or do you leave it all for the next day?
Yes. So what I do with my reviews is I don't review every game really. So if I run into a situation that in game, like if I'm playing versus a Kindred early, and I get a ward late and she like shows up in that bush and kills me, I'm like, that's obvious. I know why I lost that game. So while I'm in queue the next game, I'm like, yeah, I look at it, I'm like, yep, this is why I lost this lane. Good checkbox, got it in my mental memory, and I'll move on. Sometimes games are as simple as that, where you just need a reminder of like, hey, I need to do this a little bit better. Other games you have to really dig and figure out, like you got to look back a minute or two and figure out, how did I get so screwed here?
So
Those are the
able
games that
to. Oh, sorry to interrupt, but you were able to like compartmentalize. Okay, there's a mistake that you already understand. You know exactly what the solution is, why it happened. You're able to consolidate that and move on. You don't really need to give it too much time. Other times, you're like, okay, I'm actually kind of confused why that's going on. I actually need to dig a bit deeper. Why did that happen that way? And what's an example of a thing like that you might have to dig a bit deeper
on? If a wave got the most common one was like why a wave got frozen on the other side, or like why I'm getting zoned from this. At least in laning, because laning I think is my weakest point, easily still. So just trying to figure out how I could get out of, because playing Ahri is a lot about just surviving most of the time until you hit level 7, and then once you hit level 7 you can just leave lane, and from that point it's it's pretty like you go bot lane.
Standard. It's not really overly complicated. Yeah, you just want to then get to your mythic and then play with your jungler and play around secondary win cons. But getting to your wave clear breakpoint where you can one shot the backline, that's kind of typically that's a bit trickier. Yeah.
Exactly. So like if I couldn't get to that point cleanly, like if I ever died, like I hardly ever die before level 7. So if I died, I'm like, that's something I need to figure out why I died. But in the games where I didn't die, it's it's pretty not that hard to review. Yeah.
So that all makes sense. So now you're sitting at around what, D4, D3?
Yeah.
D4, D3 ish.
Yep.
Now we've got a better process. We've worked on your fundamentals. We've still got this 2-champ pool. What next? What walk us through that D3 to whatever it is. What happens next? Did you go to D2 plateau? Did you go straight to master? What happened here?
Well, to clarify a little bit, I wasn't in that 2-champion pool at that point. So when I hit platinum, I added Syndra.
Okay.
And then I dropped Camille for Pantheon.
Okay, so we actually so you had a 3-champ pool throughout plat to diamond. So that was Syndra, Pantheon, Ahri.
Yep.
Okay.
And I picked them based on the game state, but Ahri was my blind pick. So she was the vast majority of my games. I think it was like 50 or 60% of my games, if not more, were on Ahri. So it was really mostly just Ahri, but there was that champion in there. And then when I hit Platinum 1, part of I had decided that Syndra was a little bit too complicated for me at the time, because I really like simple, clear reference points, and I wasn't good at laning, so I didn't really feel like Syndra fit me that well. So I added Karma. She's got, you flash W on someone. So my pool getting to Diamond was those three, and then I added Syndra back in midway through my climb to High Diamond.
Interesting.
And so my climb from, I still can't believe that this happened, but I hit D4, and I had a straight 65 or 70% win rate for 2 weeks, all the way up to like mid D1. I didn't struggle at all.
And this is all in blocks. This is all in blocks.
All in blocks. All in blocks.
All reviews, all blocks, process.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear, was this a 4-champ pool or 3? So did you swap Karma back out for Syndra, or did you keep Karma and then you had the 4-champ pool?
It was mostly just a 3-champ pool.
Okay.
Once I got up to like D2, then I started making it a 4-champ pool.
Okay.
Because I was running into games where I couldn't make anything happen early. Like my bot lane's playing a Soraka support, and my top lane is 2 tanks. And my jungler was like some scaling jungler, and it was just a slow game. So I'm like, well, I mean, while my laning matters as Syndra, it doesn't matter nearly as much in this game, because we're gonna scale to mid game anyways. So I might as well pick something that's really strong.
So what's really interesting here is that you identified laning as a problem for you pretty early on. Like, you kind of knew that laning wasn't your forte, but it seems to me you, rather than trying to massively fix that problem, I mean, you obviously did some things. You worked on your warding and your leaning and your threat assessment and stuff, and like having a lane plan. But you knew that wasn't your strength as a player. You said, okay, I'm just going to pick champions that complement my strength as a player. Right? Pantheon as well, kind of more playing the map, I guess. Ahri, you play to play shove and move. Karma, again, simplifies laning phase, very clear reference, was playing more with the team, which is very, very interesting. A lot of people like to attack their weakness, but you actually doubled down on your strength and created a champ pool for that. So I actually really respect that. It's an interesting way of going about things. Okay, and so then...
And over time, my laning got better just because, I'm playing these champions so much. And, it was all in my reviews. So, like, my goal was just to not die in my lanes. I push advantage, but my advantage was, like, spreading that advantage to someone else. So, like, I had an interesting philosophy. I remember I had a review with Tim where I told him something, and he's like, that doesn't make any sense. So I had a Pantheon review with him, and I did probably a pretty poor alt bot lane, but it saved my Jinx and it made that wave crash, and it kept her like really good in the game. But mid lane got a little bit messed up. My wave got messed up, and I told him I value my Jinx's status more in this game than mine, because if she's ahead, it's very easy to play team fights. It's very clear, easy reference points for me to work from. But if I'm behind, I can be a stun bot. That's fine. I lose a little bit of agency, but it makes the game easier.
Interesting. So you had this was your philosophy, how you personally like to play solo queue. And I think that's a really important point as well, is that you got to own the way you want to win the game. Because there's many ways, right? You could have played lane bullies, put all the resources on yourself, played to hyperscale, and then have all the eggs on you. All the eggs in one basket. But ultimately, you wanted to be more of a secondary carry, and you played champions that promoted being a secondary carry. Okay. And so you basically you said in that D4 to D1 climb, you just kind of got the reps in, kept it nice and simple, so why do you think that was? What do you think made it so easy? Was it because you, again, worked on your fundamentals through play? What is it? Because a lot of people do struggle with that D4 to D1. Like, what happened there?
So I spent a very long time in high plat. And I think a combination of two things really helped me speed through diamond. I think what a lot of people fail to understand and fail to, execute on well in diamond is understanding what everyone else in your team wants.
Yeah.
I was forced to understand what everyone on my team wants and needs by playing a facilitator. because once I cleaned up my laning enough to
Mm.
get into Diamond, I skyrocketed through Diamond to D1 just because, hey, I know what this person wants, so I know how to play around them. I know that the Hecarim's fed, so all I need to do is charm the Hecarim.
But
I
also,
have
you
these
played other
very
roles. You played top.
yeah.
You played jungle.
I
You played a
played
bit of everything.
I played collegiate jungle. I played top lane Camille for the past 2 years. I I've had friends who I've taught how to play the game. So I played a lot of ADC, teaching them how to lane as support
Mm.
because a lot of people want to come in and play that. Support's really the only role that I don't have a really solid understanding of.
Right.
Every other role I understand to a not to a really high
Yeah.
level,
But a
but I think
baseline.
it's yeah, exactly.
I think that's actually a
So
really important point, by the way, because I don't want people to look at the video and be like, oh, this guy's just a talented gamer. He just, look at him. He got to D4 to
I'm
D1.
not.
That's not at all the case. But okay, so ties in. I'm so glad you wrote this because this ties into again my philosophy about what the climb really looks like. Right? We've said this and we've worked on this in the reviews where platinum really is about understanding. You got to have your chat mastery, understand the mid jungle 2v2, really start to develop your matchup understanding, all that, and then consistency of fundamentals, all that stuff, and baseline win condition assessment will get you to D4. That
Yep.
D4, especially the D2 to master, you're really forced to start thinking holistically about the game. But that is a skill that you had already somewhat developed earlier on in your journey. So when it
Yep.
got to that point, all you had to do was connect the two. You had that skill set that was already kind of there.
Mhm.
Once we brushed up your laning and your fundamentals, it actually makes perfect sense why you
Mhm.
never really
Yep.
struggled to get to master or that close that D4 to D1 or D4 to master. So
Yeah.
ultimately, I think I would say that's quite, I wouldn't say it's rare, but I would say it's uncommon, right? Because a lot of people,
Mhm.
that have your game knowledge, they wouldn't have swapped around as much and might be already higher relo in the first place, or maybe wouldn't have been in plat for so long. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think it's
Mhm.
important to note that it's not talent; it's just experience. You
Mhm.
had the experience over the years. OG play. You played the game for a long ass time. You played many, many roles. That's what led you
Yep.
to have speed up that aspect of the climb. And this is the importance of understanding your league journey. Not to mention that
Mhm.
you're a sophisticated gamer with like the StarCraft background and many other games
Yep.
as well. So that's really fascinating. So we've spoken about your process. We've spoken about kind of what the things that we had to work on. So what were some of the, I guess, challenges mentally you faced? You mentioned briefly before, you were getting coaching,
Yeah.
so you maybe felt more pressure to get results because you were getting coaching. But what are some of the things that you struggled mentally with, and how did you tackle them? Maybe do both of them.
Um. So I I guess I guess because of how League is structured and because of how the other games that I've played were structured, I had this expectation where why am I not Diamond?
Hmm.
Like you got to really put into perspective. Diamond is what the top 2.5%. That's what Master was in StarCraft. It's Diamond was set at the top 20% in StarCraft, and in a lot of other games, it's not. For me, it was overcoming the fact that hey, I am this rank, right? Platinum is the top 15%. That is the rank that I got, and I needed to not be frustrated that I wasn't getting to Diamond. Um, so that's one of
It's
them.
like managing
Like,
expectations and understanding the reality of
yeah,
what actually the rank means, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of probably the biggest one that I struggled with during my time in the MLA is accepting ending on a loss. Um, One of my coping I don't recommend this to anyone, and I did it because I had to. But what I would do, and it really brought clarity to me of how poorly I play when I'm tilted. Um, I if I started getting upset after a block, and I felt like, oh man, I have to get a win. I went and played on a Smurf, and I realized, man, I'm losing games when I'm like significantly below, and I'm costing my team these games because I reviewed some of those. I'm like, wow, I'm playing terribly. So it's like that's one of the big mental blocks that I came over. It's like it's okay to end on a loss. It's okay to have a bad block. In fact, I think it's really good to have a bad block because that means that the next day you get to improve so much. Because if you just have a 3-0 block and you look at your next day, I'm like, man, I'm just going to
It's
work on the
easy.
same
You're
things, I
chilling.
guess. Yeah, you're chilling. But if you have a tough block, man, you really get to look at, I made these mistakes. And I'm like, oh, now I need to look at these things. Now, if you have an 0-3 block, it can be tough because sometimes there's multiple things you need to work on. But you need to pick one of them. You can't work on all the things at once. You just got to focus on one until you get it down, and then you're good.
Okay, I want to expand on this because one of the common critiques or common questions we get in the comment section is something along the lines of like, reviewing. How do you review and stuff? And now, before you joined the MLA, it seemed like you never really reviewed that much,
No,
right?
never.
So you came to the MLA. We had to teach you how to review. What would be some advice that just based off your experiences? What would be some advice to others you would give about reviewing and developing the skill of reviewing? Because it seems like that really carried you. Like I'm really thinking about your
Oh,
journey
yeah.
right now, and as you're stepping it through, I think your ability to review the games the next day seems to be
Mhm.
like literally the crux of your climb.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, there's that. Um, the one thing that I think is super important and how I internalize learning something. I'm an audio learner, so I need to talk about things to learn them. So one of the other things that helped me greatly in my climb is the Pure VOD review. Just the fact of going in there and looking at other people's mistakes and like just talking, reviewing other people's games. Because I am a firm believer of you don't truly know something. You can't truly execute on something until you can teach it. Because once you can teach it, it's so core and just so part of who you are that it's just second nature. So I would go into games and I there are a couple friends I have in the Discord that we would gather and I'd review games that are way lower than mine. And I'd say, "Oh yeah, this is the consequence of them not doing this." So that would also put in my mind, that. But yeah, all that combined with the reviewing beforehand. Um and it's really just about identifying what you don't know. It's really hard to do, identify what you don't know. But if you look at other people's games or even like watching some random VODs on the MLA about like you pointing out mistakes to people. If you point out those mistakes and you see you're pointing out those mistakes in other people's videos, other people's games, it allows you to look at your game. It's like, am I making that mistake?
So for you,
And
it's a
that's
little
what.
bit perspective and like kind of
Mhm.
you felt as though you understood that at the start. You probably wouldn't. You probably weren't that great at reviewing, but over time, as you were maybe helping people lower than you, friends or people in the Discord, or whether it be
Yeah.
watching other people's reviews, you were slowly kind of ingraining or knowing kind of what to subconsciously look for in your games.
Mhm.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
And it was a skill in itself, right? It's not like you came in and you were great at
No.
reviewing. It took time. Okay.
No, I didn't even. I think I remember for our first like month or 2 months, like I, I didn't even know what to look for, and I think it until our third review. So I did a review every 3 weeks, so that would have been 9 weeks in. I didn't even really have a good process at all. And then once we had that last one, I asked you what am I supposed to be looking for, like how like, and then you gave me clear things that I was messing up in the game, and I'm like, okay, so that for the next 3 weeks, I'm just going to look at this and I'm going to try and figure out where I'm messing up here. Yeah.
Okay. And so now, now you've been through this journey, you know, what are some things that or like maybe misconceptions you had about the climb? Because obviously you were a genuine platinum player, right? You were a genuine
Mhm.
platinum player. You
For
had an
9 years.
yeah, how long? 9 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 9 years, right? You're a hardcore platinum player. You know, what are some of the I guess maybe misconceptions you had about climbing a League of Legends? Like, because I really struggle to understand what a platinum player thinks of diamond or what it takes to get to diamond or or even diamond to master for that matter. Like, what are
Mhm.
things now that you look back on, you're like, what was I thinking about in terms of like my perception of that climb? And like, maybe what are some misconceptions that you had that that you've been able to consolidate now going through this process?
Um, I guess like some of the stuff I've already said, like it's okay to end on a loss. You know, you climb more if you stop. Um,
Also, you thought you
like
needed to play more games in a way rather than sometimes play less. Like you thought you needed to play more to kind of get the
yeah,
results.
yeah, you don't have to make up for that loss at the end of your block, or if you had an 0-3 block, you don't have to make up for it right now. You can do that the next day. It's fine. You know, quality over quantity matters a lot. Um, another big thing that I've told some people that have had some frustrations and some ego problems, and like me, I was a platinum player for 9 years. I had ego problems. But honest to God, no one's looking at you. Like e- every rank is just another step up with a shiny symbol. If you're gold 1, you're hardly different from a platinum 4 player. And it's just a shiny symbol. And if you get it out of your head like that, oh, it's so big. There's such a big difference between gold 1 and platinum. There's not. It- just keep doing what you're doing and you'll get there.
Right. It was like just like
Um,
breaking it down. It's like just game. It's just gameplay at the end of the day. Like get into the
yeah,
details as well. Right.
yeah. But yeah,
Okay.
that's
Okay. So moving on, I've got some questions here. So would you do anything differently if you were to do this climb again? Would you do anything differently, or are you pretty happy with kind of the way you went about things in hindsight?
for the most part, I'm really happy with the way that I did it. I think the big thing that I wouldn't do is I wouldn't tilt Q. Because every time I did that, like I've talked a couple times, I regretted it. You just lose a ton of games, and I did that several times, and it definitely hindered my progress. Um, and one thing that I don't regret doing necessarily, but like maybe I would have changed, is that simple champion pool. Like I came to that conclusion a little bit late, but it was pretty early on in my journey.
Yeah.
But um, as you've said so many times, you're learning one thing: you're learning the champion or the game. And I told myself once that I was going to pick up a champion that you recommended that was simple, that I kind of vibed with, because I wanted to learn the game. And I knew that once I learned the game, I'd have a lot more fun playing the more fun champions that I wanted to play. Because I really wanted to play like Silas and Camille and Akali or Zed or whatever, all these like complicated champions. Not necessarily those ones specific, but I was listing complicated champions. And uh, you know, once you learn those things, you can. I'm planning on coming back to some of those more complicated champions and really trying to have a crack.
Right, yeah, and this is kind of what we mentioned a lot on the Broken by Concept podcast, how sometimes it is better, or we actually believe that it is better to climb first with maybe champions that are a little bit simpler versus better quality opponents, truly understand the game, and then we can always revisit these more complex champions, but then you have a
Yep.
much easier time learning them. So I think you definitely did the right thing there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so like we mentioned before, were there any stage 4 issues, like you said, ego and things like that, that you had to overcome, or do you think we've addressed that one already?
I think for the most part we've addressed that one.
Okay.
Um, like, yeah.
Okay. Now, would there be any advice you would give to others? What advice? What are the kind of the top, say, 3-ish tips that you would give to others on their climb, um, given your experiences?
Um, play with intensity. That's my biggest tip.
Hmm.
Um, because if you're playing with intensity, uh, then you're expressing your best self, and if you're expressing your best self, then
So
there's that.
intensity for you
Um,
means simply expressing your best self, right? It's like coming
yes,
in, I'm going to try my best. I'm going to have a crack, do the best I can. That's what intensity means. Because I get, again, that question a lot. What does intensity actually mean?
Yeah. So for me, that means like, as I said, I come home, from a long day and I only play a 2 block because that's all my brain can handle before I start to get tired. Or, some days that's a 4 block. It also means eating dinner before I play, making sure that, everything else in my life is taken care of and I only have one thing that I need to focus on,
I
and that's
love
the
it.
game.
I love it.
Um, the second tip that I would give is play with intention. You'll never learn anything unless you play with intention. Like, if you just dilly dally and push away for no reason, you'll never understand whether that was a good play or not. But if you try to all in a Fizz as Zed and he E's your ult, well, then right? Um, so
So by intention you mean, because again, this is where I feel like you would have a really great take because you've gone through the thousands of games dilly dallying, if you will, and then now you've been on the other side of the coin, which is like actually playing with an intention. Like, so because again, people get confused with, does that mean, because like when I think about the game, that means I'm probably not going to express my best self because then I'm overwhelming my mental stack. So how do you find that balance? Is it kind of like, what advice would you give there? It's not like you're thinking about every decision you're making. It's more about,
no.
so what does that mean?
And this was a huge problem I had. This was actually a huge problem that I had that helped me a lot. There's a review on the MLA that I watched over and over again because it gave me so much confidence. It was an Ari versus Fizz review. And you said, League's this game where you can't focus on everything at once. It's fine and right to sometimes only focus solely on your wave and your opponent because you're safe and you can't die. Other times you realize, oh, my wave's fucked. And I have to figure out how I can get this out. So I don't need to I shouldn't be focusing on the enemy champion. I need to just look at the map and figure out how can I do this safely.
So it's like
League's
allocating
a game where you can't,
mental resources.
Yeah, exactly. I remember I was trying to focus on everything at once, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't track the jungler while laning properly and all this stuff. You have to allocate your mental space to specific tasks.
And that's where maybe picking one or two things you want to maybe direct a little bit more attention towards, at least temporarily, really understand that concept, really develop that muscle memory. And then once that's kind of deeply ingrained, then we've expanded our mental stack. We understand that a little bit more. We don't have to think about that as much. And then we can allocate mental resources elsewhere, right? And then that just goes on forever in a way, right? It's like, there is always levels to developing your mental stack, because when the opponent gets better as you climb, something that maybe once was a habit that you didn't have to think about is now, oh shit, that's actually quite difficult. I actually have to allocate more mental stack towards that because this lane is getting in my face, and I've never played a matchup like this before. And then it rinse repeat. So it never ends. The learning journey never ends in that sense.
And the super important thing is you really just focus on the one thing, because it doesn't matter if you die for other reasons. It doesn't matter if you're losing the game for the other reasons. If you focus on the one thing, eventually that one thing will become so ingrained that you won't have to think about it. And then you can focus on something else, and you'll never die to the other thing that you messed up.
That's right. And that's where it comes into consistency. It's like, okay, let's say there are 5 reasons I could die in lane. Yep. If I focus on all of them at the same time, I'm always going to die to one of those 5 things over the course of 50 games. But if I focus on one of them for let's say 15 games, and then at least I know I'm not going to die to that ever again. So I've only got 4 ways I could die, and then you just chop them down one by one, right?
Yep, exactly. That's exactly what I did.
That requires foresight, it requires patience, and it requires a respect for the difficulty of the game, and it requires a respect for the muscle memory and the mental stack. Because this is the thing that you have, Zach, that I think a lot of people struggle with is, again, that understanding of what actually makes good League of Legends and what the learning journey actually looks like, and the respect for the mental stack. If you don't understand that concept of the mental stack and you don't feel it, you don't feel it in game, It's so hard. I mean, it's just so goddamn hard. You're going to be overwhelmed forever. And it just takes time. It takes time and energy.
Yeah. I think the last thing that I would give advice to someone else is don't be afraid to try. Like, I remember part of my climb to D4 was fixing my skirmishing. I was in P1 like 50 LP or whatever. I was almost to Diamond Promo so many times, and I realized that my skirmishing wasn't up to snuff. I wasn't going out on all these opportunities. I was missing a ton of picks on Ari, which is super important. So I decided every time I see a play, I'm just gonna go. Well, I almost hit P4, which was a little bit demotivating. But right after that, and I learned so much from my journey down. That's as soon as I got back up to Plat 1, I hit Diamond, and I went straight to Masters from there. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to try and mess up. You'll learn more that way.
That's the only way.
Yeah, you can either make mistakes, lose games, learn and climb, or you can sit plateaued and keep that ego.
And sit in your little comfort bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's really what it comes down to. 100% agree. And it's scary, though. It's scary to do that because when you make the play, when you make that decision in a game, you're thinking everyone's looking at you. It's your fault. Mm-hmm. And they're right. It is your fault. But at least they're going to be sitting over there in the same rank for years. You're going to be actually learning. You get something from this game. And then no matter what, you lose. So what? These people don't really matter to you. They don't give a shit. You're never going to see them again. You don't know them in real life. Like, literally, go next. You learn, take something, move on. Your learning journey is so much faster, but it requires bravery, right? You got to be quite brave, and you got to have a.
It's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not at all.
It is 100% super hard to do.
Uncomfortable.
Incredibly. Like, I was so upset when I was hitting Plat 4 almost, and I was like, man, what am I doing wrong here? But, the results show themselves. Like, you'll never learn anything if you don't try.
100%. So last thing here, before we maybe take a look at some of your gameplay, what was the thing about the MLA that you found the most helpful? Maybe outside the coaching, like maybe outside the coaching side of the MLA, what was the thing about the MLA that you enjoyed the most? Or found the most helpful?
The thing I enjoyed the most was definitely the peer VOD review. The thing that I think was probably the most helpful was all the VODs on the MLA. Because being an audio learner, I need someone to tell me something for me to really learn it. So just hearing you or Tim explain those concepts to other people really helped me get it in my brain. So I just think there's so much value in all the VODs up there. You can learn so much from really any of them. So
great.
That's what I found the most valuable.
Beautiful. All right. So what we'll do, we're going to go, so what I decided, we're going to go through the first maybe 10 minutes of maybe one of your earlier VODs and maybe the first 10 minutes of a later VOD in your journey. And then we can kind of just riff off what we see and then go from there. Okay, so we're diving in. This was when you were, how many games deep into Ari, sorry?
This was about 20 to 25 games. Okay. We were sitting around Plat 4.
Okay, P4, very early on in our journey. So, I think what we're going to do is just kind of, baseline, take a look at where your gameplay was at a baseline level. This is when, you were saying that laning wasn't one of your strong points. So walk us through, this early on in your journey, were you trying to experiment with certain things? Like, what was going through your mind heading into these sorts of games this early on in your journey?
So I was just trying a bunch of different things. Okay. For instance, this game, I don't quite remember it too well, but I think my intent with this was I played a VOD recently. I remember I had played a VOD recently where I pushed a Syndra in and absolutely dumpstered her.
Yeah.
But this Syndra murders me.
Yeah.
And I'm so confused why.
Right. But I can see that you are playing with intention, right? You're trying something.
Yes.
You're I can see that you're not just sitting there playing co-op versus AI, playing really scared. You're you're trying something, and now I can see that there's a lot of
The
sloppy
Qs are terrible.
Qs. Your wave's in a really awkward position. You've gotten hit by many Qs. You've kind of basically now zoned yourself and already used both
Burned both my
pots by
pots.
2 minutes 30. I mean, this is genuine P4 level. Maybe
Yeah.
even lower.
Oh,
RE
yeah,
gameplay.
because my laning was easily my worst. Like this is like gold level laning if
Yeah, right.
because this is my weakest point. I was terrible at laning. I had no idea
Oh
how to
my
like
god.
hold abilities or
Yeah.
how to like anything like that. All I was just throwing on a queue because I wasn't even timing with last hits. I didn't even
Mm.
know that was a thing.
Right. So this early on, you weren't even. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, because think about it, you played a lot of champs like Camille, right? Where it wasn't really
Mhm.
about you weren't
I
timing
never
ranged
played
abilities.
champions.
Ah, okay, that makes so much sense. Because I'm like, yeah, this is very unsophisticated laning. I can see that. So what you essentially tried to do here was a classic kind of use offense as defense strategy. But the problem with it is that you
Yeah.
got hit by every ability.
Yep.
You didn't like you kind of. I mean, that was good. That actually Q was actually quite nice. But then you didn't really know how to bait out abilities, and you're kind of
I'm
just
also being so indecisive there.
yeah. I see what you mean.
Like
And
even now, like I have a plan, but it's not like I'm not fully committing to my plan.
yeah. But and in this time in your journey, by the way, it's not like you were super clear. It's not like you clearly understood what was going wrong and why. It's like you were just baseline. Okay, you might take maybe one thing or two things away from it. And I think that it's important to put in perspective is that there's so much going wrong here, right? There is
Yeah.
maybe not really there's matchup understanding problems specific to Syndra, right? Not really knowing the cooldowns of this matchup very well. There was
Mhm.
baiting out ability problems, right? And this
Mhm.
is there's no way you're going to have the mental stack to actually bait out abilities this early on in your journey.
Mhm.
There is lane hypothesis with the Syndra. There's also probably inconsistent fundamentals. There was no ward during that entire time.
No.
You know, so there's a lot going on here, and this is kind of what we're talking about. You got to pick one thing, and ultimately
Mhm.
one or two things. You're not going to improve at everything at the exact same time, and this is why this early on in your journey, it really is about getting the reps in, but it's about getting the reps in with intention, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like at this point, I wasn't even like I think this was before you'd even told me that like my wording and leading was bad and all this other stuff.
Right.
So like all you said from my first review, which is I think all we had at this point,
Mm.
was just come in with a hypothesis and try it. So that's what I was doing in my games. I was like, I'm gonna just try and like heavy trade this Syndra, even though I didn't even really know what that
Right.
was,
Yeah.
and I'm just gonna see what happens. And
Yeah, but
sometimes you get dumpstered like this.
Well, but sometimes I mean, but this is a great trade. Here you end up using your W reactively, what it seemed like, and end up
Mhm.
getting a really solid trade. And here, because there was not many minions, you could actually walk kind of past the wave and take a really great trade. So you
Yeah.
can see there's like these shining moments with like, oh, okay. But again, that is an example of a trade that you learn a lot from because you can go back in the review and be like, okay, well, that trade went
Mhm.
pretty well. Now you're starting to actually use
Yes.
I can see here, you're starting to now, okay, I can actually use my W more reactive here to some of these abilities. Okay. And you can
Yeah.
see how slowly, even within the game itself, things are clicking because you are kind of playing with intention.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think we're starting to see, over time, this is kind of the beginning of the way your style of Ari, which is all right. You definitely like to play for shove. You definitely like to play for prio, and you definitely wanted to
Yeah, I
find a
just
way.
love sitting in rivers.
Yeah, you
A
like
big thing
impacting
that I
bot.
have, my philosophy on Ari, and one thing that I've discovered is sitting in the river allows your side lanes to heavy trade without the enemy being able to heavy trade back.
Hmm.
And it's so powerful.
Very powerful. Yeah.
Um,
I just
and
want
here
to.
you see another example of like me playing terribly because I blow my first R for
Oh,
nothing.
it's
Yeah, there's
unbelievable.
some intention in going bot lane, but I completely throw my most impactful part of the game away.
And when you look at this is again Ari specifics. I mean, ultimately this was never gankable, right? Like when you look at it
Yeah.
now, I mean, we probably worked on this as well. Like this is never gankable.
Yes.
They're reacting to a wave.
Yes.
Your jungler's basing on the other side of the map.
Yep.
And again, this is
It's a Zeri Yumi,
Zeri
just
Yumi.
terrible early.
We have no idea where their jungler is. So you're pinging on my way, help, when they're catching a wave on bot side.
Exactly.
Makes
Yeah.
absolutely no sense. And not to mention, you throw out your charm. You should never be throwing out
Yep.
your charm. You should literally just be holding
Hmm.
your charm reactively. And then you also forget about the Syndra, your mental stack's overwhelmed, and then that's like end of review right there anyway. You're 26 CS by 6 minutes. You've wasted your first R. You know,
Yep. And that's how I review a game like this. I come in and be like, I wasted my first R. That's a big reference point on RE. So that's also like one of the big things I looked at. If my first R doesn't make a good impact, then I go look at that.
right.
But you learn a lot from this game because yeah, I tried. I made a lot of mistakes in the lane, and then also my first R didn't work out. So I try and figure out why didn't my first R work
Why
out.
did the roam not work? Yeah. And then move on.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
this is I mean, this is a real. We don't even need to go deeper. This is just a taste test of like where you were at as a player. So what we can do is just quickly dive into maybe the one of your higher elo vods and just kind of contrast the early lane here. So this one is in D1, relatively recent game here. Bit of an unconventional matchup with that of the Nasus. So do you remember what your hypothesis was in this one?
Yeah. So I wanted to 3-stack and harass him as much as possible. I did start Charm because there's an invade and we got a
Right.
kill, which is kind of unfortunate. But Nasus shouldn't be able to do anything, and you should be able to, in the first two waves, just completely run him out of resources, get a ward after the second wave or even after the first wave, and then harass him under tower and maybe kill him. Call for your jungler to help.
So you can see there's a lot more control here, right? You can see the direct intention with the wave. You have a hypothesis. Very, very good patience. Look at the patience on the E there. Again, old you probably would have threw out that charm. I mean, not probably. I think
Oh yeah,
100%.
100%.
Very nice short trades. Very, very good. I mean, and it doesn't even look like the same play. I mean, you can argue that this is an easier matchup, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way you would have played it. I mean, look at even the Q accuracy here as well, man. Like the beautiful auto W Qs there. I mean, and this is just such a clean levels 1 to 3. And this is the result, the direct result of having a freed up mental stack and having intention. And over time, slowly and surely developing your matchup understanding. So we'll continue on. And out of interest, it's something we didn't talk about in the actual kind of conversation. What's your philosophy on builds? So, a lot of people like to, kind of, I guess, specialize in a particular build, or did you alternate builds? What was your philosophy on that?
So my current philosophy is in the loading screen, what I do is I think, okay, what's my job gonna be this game? So if I'm gonna be the engage, I go Everfrost, right? If my team has a low damage ADC and they're all tanks, then I'll go Leandres, but that's very rarely gonna happen. If I'm solo AP and my team has engaged, then I go Ludens. It's very team comp dependent, and I choose my build based on my job. There are exceptions though. So if the game is super fast, then I'll go Everfrost because you have to. Because you have to get that spike earlier, otherwise the game's just going to implode anyways. And in the games where you're behind, you need to make picks, so I go Everfrost. So mostly it's like looking at the loading screen during the game and thinking about what my job is that game.
Interesting. So you're not really a believer in, for you personally, you're not really a believer in kind of specializing in a build path. You're more of a believer in kind of, if you main a champion, you should be able to play all the builds and adapt to whatever the team comp needs.
Not necessarily. I played 50%, 60% of my games on RE. So much of my journey was on RE, so I was able to adapt so much more.
Right.
For Syndra, I pretty much only play like one build. Sometimes I'll play two builds because I don't play her nearly as much. With Pantheon, It's basically just one build because I don't play him as often. But because I play RE so much and I've specialized in her, then I do. But the familiarity with the with the builds because I've played so much of this champion is,
Interesting.
why I do that.
Okay, that makes total sense. I mean, and what I kind of want to roughly look at here, this lane looks relatively straightforward, is what you do with this pressure here. I mean, so what's your mindset? Now you're approaching level 6, you're getting a lot of prior onto this Nasus, you're obviously playing to kind of, deny him a little bit of CS,
So, like, I want to play with my jungler because my jungler helped me get 2 kills. So whatever side of the map my jungler's playing to, whether it's a win condition or not, I want to play with my jungler. So I want to get a really big stacked wave. Even in hindsight, Nasus isn't going to be able to follow anyways, but ideally I want to get a big stacked wave in here so that I can have more time to do things. But like I probably should have been at that play there, instead of sitting mid lane. Ideally.
Yeah, all the way back here, you probably should have recognized that your Talia is posturing aggressively bot side, maybe even looking into that blue. An argument can be made here to potentially shove this a little bit faster. AoE this one with the Q and actually back up your Talia on the blue there.
Exactly.
And because,
as long as I play with my team, we win the game.
Yeah, and when you get higher as well, you're not just looking at key mistakes, you're probably also looking at missed opportunities, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a testament to that. You got to remember, when you're in platinum, you're making pretty bloody gigantic mistakes. But when you're in D1 Master, the mistakes are still obvious, but there is something to be said with looking at missed opportunities as well. This is all relatively straightforward. Reset, beautiful reset on the cannon.
Yep.
This TP I really don't like, and this is the the nitpicking now that we would get into here, right? Because empowered TP at 10 minutes, it's a cannon wave, waves coming back to you, you're not really going to miss much farm. I would much prefer you hold that TP, and then we can actually use that TP to probably impact the map later on and probably complement your bot side. But, again, this is where the nitpicks really come into play, and you can kind of see how, earlier on, there was so much stuff to really break down in the first, few minutes, and in this game we're just now nitpicking small details like, okay, you could have shoved and helped there, or shouldn't have used TP back to lane and things like that. So I think we've got across the point here. So overall, look, I think that you're a very great case study, Zach. I think there's a lot people can take away from this, and yeah, I mean, were there any final words that you wanted to share with anyone? Any shout outs?
Well, obviously, I want to greatly thank you and Tim for all the work that you guys have put in. I'd like to shout out Hide on Discord and George Bread for being my friends and working in VOD questions with me so much. But yeah, that's really about it. I'm just so... I never thought that Masters would even be achievable for me. Honestly, like one thing we didn't cover earlier was part of the reason why I swapped to mid lane and came to the mid lane academy, because I really agreed with your philosophy on the game, and I was coming here as a last resort to see if I could hit diamond, and I'm very happy that I did.
Wow, that's amazing, man. Well, thank you so much for your time and being so open and transparent about your journey, and I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do over the next few seasons, man. So,
oh yeah,
keep us updated, and we'll take it from there. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope you got a bit of value. Otherwise, we'll see you around the comments section. Cheers.